They handed her dismissal papers after 15 years of service. Could this be the end for a decorated captain? Security escorted her to the edge of the base with no explanation, no transport, and no respect. She walked alone across the empty tarmac as rain began to fall. Her career was over. Then something unprecedented happened. A Blackhawk helicopter suddenly broke formation overhead, circling once before descending directly in her path. The door slid open. Everything was about to change. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of courage and redemption that often go untold. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Captain Asia Winters stepped onto the polished concrete of Fort Bryce Military Base. Morning colors unfurled across the sky in bands of crimson and gold, bathing the pristine rows of barracks and hangars in warm light. It was the kind of dawn that photographers captured for recruitment posters, the kind that made fresh-faced cadets swell with patriotism. 15 years into her service, Asia still felt that flutter of pride as she saluted the flag during morning formation. Her spine ramrod straight despite the old injury that sent occasional sparks of pain down her left leg. She had no reason to suspect this day would be different from the 5,475 that had preceded it in her military career. No reason to imagine that by nightfall, the same base that had been her home would cast her out like a stranger. The summons came via a junior officer who appeared at her elbow as she finished inspecting the maintenance logs for her unit's helicopters. "Captain Winters, your presence is requested at administrative headquarters." "Immediately, ma'am." Asia nodded, handing the clipboard back to her chief mechanic. "Continue the pre-flight check, Sergeant Rivera. I want those birds ready by 0900. Walking across the base, Asia noticed the respectful nods from personnel she passed. A pair of young lieutenants snapped to attention, their salutes crisp. Staff Sergeant Delaney called out from the mess hall door. "Morning, Captain. Saved you some of the good coffee." Even Colonel Blackwood's secretary offered a warm smile as Asia passed the command offices. These were the small currencies of respect accumulated over years of service. 3 combat tours, 7 commendations, the Silver Star for the extraction mission in Kandahar that had cost her full mobility in her left leg but saved 37 lives. The invisible ledger of a career built on competence and sacrifice. The administrative building stood apart from the others, a utilitarian structure of glass and steel that seemed deliberately designed to intimidate. Asia checked her uniform out of habit, straightening the name badge that read Winters A before pushing through the double doors. The receptionist didn't look up. "Third door on the right, Captain." The office was small, windowless, and contained 3 officers seated behind a plain metal desk. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood sat center, flanked by Major Reynolds and Captain Harris from JAG. None of them stood when she entered. None of them returned her salute. "Captain Winters," Blackwood said, his voice flat as the planes surrounding the base. At ease, Asia widened her stance, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on a point just above Blackwood's head. She had served under the colonel for 3 years, and knew the hard lines of his face better than her own father's. Today, those lines seemed carved deeper, his eyes avoiding hers with uncharacteristic evasion. Without preamble, he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Your service to the United States Army is hereby terminated, effective immediately." Asia didn't move to take the paper. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible as a foreign language. "Sir, this is a direct order, Captain. You're to collect your personal effects and vacate base premises within the hour." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. 15 years dissolved in 15 seconds. "On what grounds, sir?" Major Reynolds spoke for the first time, his tone clinically precise. "The termination is administrative in nature. No further explanation is required or will be provided. With respect, Major, I believe I am entitled to know why my career is being ended." Colonel Blackwood finally looked at her directly, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You know why, Winters?" But she didn't. Or rather, she had a suspicion that sent ice through her veins. 3 weeks ago, during a routine review of intelligence reports, she had discovered discrepancies in weapons shipment logs to Kazakhstan. Small inconsistencies that most would overlook, but which her attention to detail had flagged. She'd compiled the findings and submitted them through proper channels up the chain of command to Blackwood himself. After that, subtle changes. Restricted access to certain files, reassignment of 2 team members, a sudden inspection of her unit's equipment, and now this. Captain Harris pushed a pen toward her. Your signature, acknowledging receipt. Aisha's hand didn't shake as she signed. 15 years of discipline prevented that much, at least. She placed the pen down with precision, then stood at attention. Request permission to address my team before departure, sir. Denied. Blackwood said, 2 MPs will escort you to your quarters to collect personal items. You are prohibited from contact with any military personnel during this process. As if summoned, the door opened behind her. 2 military policemen entered, faces impassive beneath their caps. This way, ma'am. The walk to her quarters passed in a blur. Faces turned to watch her escort. Conversations hushing as they passed. Word traveled fast on a military base. By nightfall, speculation would have solidified into rumor into accepted truth. Whatever narrative command chose to spread would become her legacy. In her quarters, the MP stood at the doorway while she mechanically gathered her belongings. 15 years distilled into a single duffel bag, clothing, books, a handful of photographs. Her fingers lingered on one frame. The glass still smudged from the last time she'd wiped dust from it. Her team stood in front of their Blackhawk, sun glinting off the helicopter's sleek body. 6 faces grinning with the particular bond of those who entrust their lives to each other daily. The custom patch visible on their shoulders, unofficial but tolerated. Winterhawk. Specialist Zephyr Lamar, comms expert extraordinaire, barely out of college, but with an uncanny ability to intercept and decode any transmission. Lieutenant Orion Blackwell, the most gifted pilot she'd ever flown with, whose surname had opened doors until his tendency to question orders closed them again. Major Esme Tala, intelligence officer with contacts in every agency, whose quiet competence masked a mind like a steel trap. Sergeant Kaito Nakamura and Corporal Daria Cernson, both combat medics who could stabilize a patient under fire without breaking a sweat. Her team, her family, and she wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. Aisha slipped the photograph into her bag and zipped it shut. Ready? The MPs escorted her across the base, past the barracks, past the hangars where mechanics were preparing the morning's training flights, past the control tower, where she imagined Zephyr was probably monitoring all communications, wondering why her captain was being marched out by security. At the edge of the tarmac, the senior MP stopped. This is as far as we go, ma'am. Base protocol requires you exit on foot from here. Aisha stared at the expanse of empty runway stretching before her. The nearest town was 8 miles away. No transport arranged. No courtesy car. Just a long walk across exposed concrete under a sky-threatening rain. Is there something you need to tell me, Sergeant? She asked quietly, searching his face for any hint of explanation. His expression remained professionally blank. No, ma'am. Good luck to you. They turned and walked away, leaving her alone at the edge of the world she had belonged to just 1 hour ago. Overhead, the familiar thump, thump, thump of rotor blades announced the morning training exercise commencing. 5 Blackhawks rose into formation, executing the maneuvers she herself had helped design. Aisha adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and began walking. Each step sent a dull ache through her left leg. The old injury protesting the concrete surface. The first drops of rain began to fall, spattering the runway. She didn't quicken her pace, didn't look back. Military bearing had been drilled into her since she was 18 years old. And if this was to be her final act as Captain Aisha Winters, she would perform it with dignity. The sound of her boots against the tarmac created a lonely rhythm. Step, click, step, click. The slight drag of her left foot providing the syncopation. Behind her, the base continued its daily operations, indifferent to her departure. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the small flash drive concealed there, the one piece of insurance she had managed to secure before they stripped her access. Every instinct had told her to make a copy of her findings after submitting the official report. Years in intelligence had taught her to trust those instincts. The Kazakhstan discrepancies, weapons technology disappearing, funds rerouted, and at the center of it all, signatures she recognized. Senior officers, including Colonel Blackwood. Lightning fractured the sky overhead, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. The rain intensified, plastering her uniform to her skin. Through sheets of water, she could see the training exercise continuing. The Blackhawks performing complex maneuvers despite the deteriorating weather. As she walked, memories surfaced unbidden. Her first day at the base. Nervous but determined to prove herself. The first time she took the controls of a Blackhawk. The machine responding to her touch like an extension of her own body. The mission in Kandahar, where she'd held a dying private's hand while flying one-handed through enemy fire, promising him he'd make it home. A promise she had kept. 15 years of service ended with a piece of paper and a long walk in the rain. Will this forsaken captain find redemption? The change came without warning, a shift in the rhythm above, barely perceptible at first among the steady beat of rotors. Asia paused mid-stride, her trained ear catching what most would miss. One of the Blackhawks had altered its pattern. Through the curtain of rain, she watched as Blackhawk 6 suddenly veered away from the formation. The maneuver was deliberate, executed with the precision that came only from thousands of flight hours, not a mechanical failure, not a weather adjustment, a choice. Radio chatter erupted across the base, even from her position on the tarmac. Asia could hear the control tower's speakers crackling with urgent commands. Blackhawk 6, return to formation immediately. 6, acknowledge. Lieutenant Blackwell, this is a direct order. Return to formation. The helicopter continued its deviation, executing a wide circle around the airfield perimeter. Base alarms began to wail, their shrill cry cutting through the rain. Emergency protocols initiated. Asia had written half those protocols herself. On the far side of the base, figures were running toward the hangars. Security vehicles roared to life, lights flashing through the downpour. Colonel Blackwood would be in the command center by now, watching the rogue helicopter with cold fury. Blackhawk 6 completed its circuit and began descending, not toward the landing pads where the ground crew waited, but directly toward the tarmac toward Asia. The helicopter dropped with controlled precision, executing a ceremonial approach pattern typically reserved for fallen soldiers being returned home. The significance wasn't lost on Asia. This wasn't just defiance. It was a statement. 20 feet ahead of her, the Blackhawk touched down, rotors still spinning, whipping the rain into spiraling curtains. For a moment, Asia stood frozen, her military training warring with instinct. Approaching an unauthorized landing was against every regulation in the book. The side door slid open. Lieutenant Orion Blackwell sat at the controls, his face set in lines of grim determination. Behind him, Specialist Zephyr Lamar was hunched over communications equipment, fingers flying across interfaces. Major Esme Tala stood at the open door, her normally immaculate uniform soaked from the rain blowing in. Sergeant Nakamura and Corporal Cernson flanked her, medical kits ready as always. Every one of them wore their Winterhawk patches, prominently displayed despite the unofficial status. Every one of them was committing career suicide at this very moment. Esme extended her hand into the rain. Captain Winters, you have approximately 2 minutes to decide. After that, we're all court-martialed. Asia didn't move. What are you doing, Major? The right thing. Esme's voice carried even over the rotor wash like you taught us. Zephyr appeared beside Esme, tablet in hand. Ma'am, you need to see this. The screen showed surveillance footage destamped 3 days earlier. Colonel Blackwood in civilian clothes meeting with 2 men in an off-base location. The angle was poor, but the exchange of documents was clear. One of the men had the distinctive bearing of foreign military. That's Vadim Klov, Esme shouted over the noise. Russian military intelligence. The Kazakhstan discrepancies you found weren't just accounting errors. They're selling classified weapons technology. The pieces clicked into place. The unusual reassignments, the security restrictions, the abrupt dismissal when she'd gotten too close to the truth. "They're trying to bury the evidence," Orion called from the cockpit. "And you with it?" In the distance, security vehicles were speeding toward them, sirens wailing over the storm. They had seconds, not minutes. Asia made her decision. With one fluid motion, she threw her duffel into the helicopter and climbed aboard. Esme pulled the door shut as Orion immediately began liftoff procedures. "This is treason," Asia said, strapping herself into a jump seat. Zephyr didn't look up from her station. "Only if we're wrong, Captain." The Blackhawk rose sharply, banking hard to the east as security vehicles converged on their former position. Through the window, Asia caught a glimpse of Colonel Blackwood emerging from the command center, face contorted with rage as he shouted into a radio. "They'll scramble fighters," she said, military mind already calculating response times. Orion nodded grimly, counting on it. "Zephyr on it." The communication specialist was already working, fingers dancing across her equipment, jamming their primary frequencies. "They'll have to fall back to secondaries, which buys us maybe 15 minutes before they can coordinate an intercept." "Where are we going?" Asia asked. Esme secured her harness and handed Asia a headset. "We have a safe house arranged and a contact in JAG who wasn't part of the briefing on your dismissal." "How long have you been planning this?" The team exchanged glances. "Since you submitted your report on Kazakhstan," Orion said, eyes never leaving his instruments as he pushed the helicopter to its limits. Esme noticed the unusual security protocols immediately afterward. "When they restricted your access to the intelligence databases, we knew something was wrong." "They didn't know you had already copied the key files," Esme added. "The flash drive in your pocket? That's what they're really afraid of." Asia's hand went to her pocket, confirming the drive was still there. "How did you know about that?" Zephyr gave a quick grin, the familiar expression jarring against the circumstances. "Because I'm the one who helped you bypass the security protocols to download them, ma'am. Remember?" "Of course. 3 weeks ago, an accidental server reset during maintenance that had given them a 5-minute window to access restricted files. She had thought it coincidental timing." "They're scrambling the F-15s, Zephyr announced, monitoring a frequency. 2 birds armed for intercept. 8 minutes out." Orion nodded, pushing the helicopter lower, hugging the terrain. "Perfect timing. We hit the canyon in 4." The Blackhawk dropped altitude rapidly, skimming just above the treeline. Rain lashed against the windshield as Orion navigated with the instinctive skill that had made him legendary among the flight crews. Asia felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the crystalline focus of a mission in progress. Except this time they were flying against their own people. "Brief me," she said, military training taking over. "Full situation assessment." Esme nodded. "All business, despite the water still dripping from her uniform. 3 months ago, you noted discrepancies in weapon shipment logs to Kazakhstan. What looked like accounting errors were actually deliberate obfuscations. Advanced weapon systems being diverted with component parts listed separately to avoid triggering security protocols. We started our own investigation after you filed your report," Zephyr continued. The reaction from command was immediate. "Information locked down, personnel reassignments, surveillance on your team." "Someone high up is involved," Orion added, banking the helicopter hard around a ridge. "The orders came directly from General Harrington's office, but the signatures were from Blackwood." The helicopter entered a narrow canyon, walls of rock rising on either side. Orion guided them through with practiced ease, using the terrain to mask their signature from radar. The maneuver would buy them precious minutes against the pursuing fighters. 2 days ago, we intercepted communications confirming a meet between Blackwood and Russian operatives. Esme said the technology they're selling includes prototype guidance systems for next-generation drones worth billions on the black market and potentially catastrophic in the wrong hands. When your dismissal orders came through this morning, we knew we had to move. Zephyr said they were eliminating the one person who had officially documented the discrepancies. The canyon widened, opening into a valley shrouded in mist and rain. Orion kept them low, following the contours of a river that snaked through dense forest. "Where's this safe house?" Asia asked. "Old hunting cabin. Sergeant Nakamura's family owns it." "Off-grid, no digital footprint," Esme replied. "We can secure the evidence there and contact our JAG." Asia processed the information with the rapid assessment that had served her through 3 combat tours. The pieces fit. The evidence was compelling, but the implications were staggering. Senior officers selling classified technology to foreign powers. A conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of command. And her team had just thrown away their careers to expose it. "You should have left me on that tarmac," she said quietly. Corporal Sorensen spoke for the first time, her Scandinavian accent more pronounced under stress. "With respect, Captain, that was never an option. Winterhawks fly together," Sergeant Nakamura added simply. The loyalty threatened to overwhelm her more than the danger. These 5 people had risked everything based on nothing more than their faith in her integrity. The weight of that trust settled on her shoulders, heavier than any command responsibility she had ever carried. The distinctive whine of jet engines cut through the helicopter's rotor noise. The F-15s had found them faster than expected. "They're coming in hot," Zephyr reported, monitoring frequencies, "orders to force us down, using whatever means necessary." "They wouldn't fire on their own," Asia said. But uncertainty colored her voice. "They don't know who's on board," Orion replied grimly. "All they know is a Blackhawk has been stolen by potential hostiles." Standard response protocol. Asia made a decision. "Set down in the next clearing. I'll surrender myself with the evidence. The rest of you can claim I forced you at gunpoint." 5 voices immediately protested. "That's not happening, Captain," Esme said firmly. "We're in this together all the way." "We took an oath," Asia reminded them, "to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic." "That's exactly what we're going to do." The cabin fell silent, each of them absorbing the weight of her words, the path they had committed to. Orion's voice came through the headsets, quiet but resolute, "Course heading to the safe house." "Captain," Asia looked at the faces of her team, saw the unwavering determination mirrored in each one. She thought of the 15 years she had given to an institution that had discarded her without explanation. She thought of Colonel Blackwood's betrayal, of the weapons being sold to foreign powers, of all that was at stake. "Take us in, Lieutenant," she said. "We have work to do." The safe house was a weathered hunting cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest that provided natural cover from aerial surveillance. The storm had intensified by the time they landed, forcing Orion to execute a precision touchdown in near-zero visibility. The team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the helicopter and establishing a perimeter while Zephyr set up communications equipment inside. "We have 72 hours at most before they find us," Esme said, spreading a map across the cabin's rough-hewn table. "That gives us a narrow window to compile the evidence and make contact with our JAG." Asia set her flash drive beside the map. "Everything I discovered is here, but it won't be enough. We need corroborating evidence that can't be dismissed as forgeries or misinterpretations. Which means we need access to the secured servers at Fort Bryce," Zephyr said, connecting a satellite uplink. "I can get us in remotely, but we'll need authentication codes that change every 12 hours. "I have today's codes," Orion offered, pulling a notebook from his pocket. "Memorize them during morning briefing." Sergeant Nakamura and Corporal Sorensen had transformed the cabin's small bedroom into a makeshift operations center, pinning maps and photographs to the walls. 15 years of military precision didn't disappear because they were suddenly operating outside the chain of command. "We need to establish contact with Senator Hargrove," Esme said. "She sits on the Armed Services Committee and has a reputation for integrity. If we can get the evidence directly to her, it bypasses the military channels that Blackwood might control." "First, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with," Asia said, military training taking over as she assessed their situation. "Zephyr, access those servers. I want everything on the Kazakhstan weapons shipments for the past 18 months. Orion, establish secure communications with our JAG contact. Esme, compile intelligence on everyone connected to these shipments. We need to know how high this goes. The cabin became a hub of focused activity. Each team member executing their tasks with the synchronicity that came from years of working together. Outside, the storm raged, providing cover as Orion concealed the helicopter under camouflage netting. Inside, Asia reviewed the contents of her flash drive with Esme, connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. These aren't just weapons components, Asia said, staring at the screen. This is classified drone guidance technology. Next-generation stuff that Congress hasn't even been fully briefed on. Esme nodded grimly. And the payment trails lead to offshore accounts connected to shell companies. Professional work designed to be untraceable. But they made mistakes, Zephyr called from her station, fingers flying across keyboards. I'm in the secured servers now. The shipping manifests don't match the inventory logs. They were double documenting everything, keeping 2 sets of records. Hour by hour, the evidence mounted. What had begun as discrepancies in shipping logs revealed itself as an elaborate scheme involving multiple senior officers. Classified technology was being systematically diverted, documented as routine shipments and sold to foreign entities through intermediaries. The money flowed back through a labyrinth of accounts, eventually reaching the conspirators in untraceable forms. At the center of it all sat Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, whose signature authorized each transaction. But above him, other names began to surface. General Harrington, Deputy Secretary Reynolds, a network extending into the highest echelons of military command. They discovered you were onto them when you submitted your initial report, Esme said, reviewing the timeline. That's why they moved so quickly to discredit and remove you. Asia stared at the evidence they had compiled, spread across every available surface in the cabin. They'll claim it's all fabricated, that we're traitors acting on behalf of foreign interests. Which is why we need to get this directly to Senator Hargrove, Orion said, returning from securing communications. Our JAG contact has arranged a meeting, but we have to get to Washington. The entire eastern seaboard will be looking for a rogue Blackhawk, Asia pointed out. We'll never make it there by air. Zephyr looked up from her screens. We don't need to. Senator Hargrove is in Colorado for a fundraising event 4 hours by road from our position. A plan began to form. They would split into 2 teams. Asia, Esme, and Zephyr would take the compiled evidence to meet the senator, while Orion, Nakamura, and Sorensen would create a diversion by flying the helicopter in the opposite direction, drawing pursuit away from the others. As they finalized preparations, Asia pulled Orion aside. You're taking the greater risk. The pilot shrugged with the casual acceptance of danger that characterized all of them. That's the job, Captain. Always has been. Before dawn, they moved out. Orion's team took off in the Blackhawk, heading west toward remote wilderness. As anticipated, military aircraft scrambled to pursue within minutes, radar tracking the helicopter's distinctive signature. Meanwhile, Asia's team slipped away in an unmarked civilian vehicle Esme had arranged, carrying the evidence that could expose the conspiracy. The meeting with Senator Hargrove was arranged for a private room in the back of a nondescript restaurant. The senator arrived alone as promised, her face grave as she reviewed the evidence. This is explosive material, Captain Winters, she said finally. If verified, it represents one of the most significant breaches of national security in decades. Every piece of information can be independently confirmed, Asia said. The server logs, the financial transactions, the shipping records, it's all there. The senator studied her with shrewd eyes that had witnessed decades of political maneuvering. You understand that by bringing this to me, you've placed yourself in extraordinary danger. These people won't simply accept exposure. With respect, Senator, that consideration became irrelevant the moment they compromised national security for profit. Hargrove nodded. Decision made. I'll need 24 hours to verify key elements independently. Then we move. My security team will escort you to a safe location until then. But as they left the restaurant, everything unraveled. Military police vehicles surrounded the building, lights flashing. Armed personnel deployed in tactical formation. Their identities had been compromised. Inside now, Esme ordered, pushing Asia and Zephyr back through the restaurant's kitchen. Alternative Exit Protocol. They escaped through service corridors, emerging into an alley just as shouts erupted behind them. The chase was brief but intense, ending at an abandoned airstrip where they found themselves surrounded. All avenues of escape cut off. United States Military Police. A voice announced over a loudspeaker. You are surrounded. Surrender immediately. Asia stepped forward, hands raised, flash drive visible in her palm. I'm Captain Asia Winters. I request direct communication with the commanding officer. A figure emerged from the lead vehicle, Major Ellis, head of military police for the region. His expression was stone as he approached. Captain Winters, you and your team are charged with theft of military property, desertion, and treason. You will surrender all stolen materials immediately. Asia held the flash drive out. Check the contents of this drive first, sir. Then decide who the traitors are. For a tense moment, the future balanced on a knife's edge. Then slowly, Major Ellis took the drive. Secure the suspects, he ordered his men. I want them separated and under guard until this is verified. They were detained, but not handcuffed. A small concession that suggested Ellis wasn't entirely convinced of their guilt. Hours passed in isolated rooms at the local military facility. No communication, no updates. Just the weight of waiting, of knowing their futures and possibly their lives depended on one person's assessment of the evidence. Then, without warning, everything changed again. The door to Asia's room opened. Major Ellis entered, his expression unreadable. Captain Winters, come with me. She was escorted to a conference room where Esme and Zephyr already waited along with Senator Hargrove. A laptop sat open on the table, screens displaying news broadcasts. Breaking news from Washington, the reporter announced. In a shocking development, several high-ranking military officials have been taken into custody following allegations of selling classified weapons technology to foreign entities. Sources close to the investigation report that evidence was provided by Captain Asia Winters and her team, who exposed the conspiracy at great personal risk. The broadcast showed footage of Colonel Blackwood being escorted into a federal building in handcuffs. Other familiar faces followed, each wearing the stunned expression of those whose power had suddenly evaporated. Your evidence has been verified, Major Ellis said formally. Senator Hargrove expedited the process through her connections with the FBI. Internal Affairs is conducting a full investigation with arrests being made across multiple bases. And my team? Asia asked. Lieutenant Blackwell and the others have been located and secured. They're being brought in now with full protective custody. 3 days later, Asia and her team were escorted into a secure Senate hearing room. As they walked down the long corridor toward the chamber, military personnel lining the walls began to stand at attention. One by one, then in waves, a silent show of respect that grew as they progressed. Men and women in uniform, acknowledging what had been risked, what had been preserved. Inside the hearing room, the Armed Services Committee waited. The chairman, a silver-haired general with more medals than space to display them, stood as they entered. Captain Winters, before we begin these proceedings, the Joint Chiefs have authorized me to return these to you. He slid her captain's bars and service medals across the table. Sometimes, Captain, following orders is not the same as serving your country. Today we acknowledge the difference. 6 months passed. Fort Bryce military base had changed as had the military hierarchy above it. The conspiracy had been fully exposed. The guilty parties court-martialed. The systems that allowed such breaches overhauled from top to bottom. On a crisp autumn morning, Asia stood before a new class of recruits. Behind her, a sign identified the program, the Winters Protocol, Ethical Intelligence Operations. Beside her stood her team, each now heading specialized divisions within the reformed command structure. You're not here to learn how to follow orders, she told the attentive faces before her. You're here to learn when not to. Above them, a formation of Blackhawks flew in perfect ceremonial pattern across the clear blue sky. As the recruits watched, one helicopter broke formation at the end of the sequence, executing a single circle before rejoining the others. A reminder visible for all to see that sometimes the true path of honor required the courage to stand apart. In the quiet that followed, Asia caught Orion's eye. The pilot gave a slight nod, the barest acknowledgement of what they had risked together and what they had won. Not medals or recognition, but something far more valuable. The knowledge that when tested, they had chosen right over easy, truth over comfort, integrity over security. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories so you don't miss the subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where quiet strength is celebrated, and every hero story finds a voice.